Look at those relics. Relic's Captain Krugel laughed, shaking his head in disgust at the graveyard of derelict human warships floating lifeless in the Sagan Nebula, as dead and useless as human nobility. His crew joined in the laughter, their mirth fading only when sensors pinged an incoming hail from the defenseless luxury starliner Celestia. The Celestia was at the Krelix's mercy, deep in neutral space and far from any human patrol routes. The Starliner's crew knew they were no match for the infamous Hyrogen raiders, their ship lacking any weapons to fight back against the technologically superior heavy cruiser. Admiral Roy Green, hero of the human Hyrogen War 5 decades prior, had been gazing out the viewport lost in memories when the alarms first blared. At 68 years old, he was a relic himself these days, a bittersweet living legend from a time when humanity had stood on the precipice of conquest by the Hyrogen. He still carried the weight of friends and comrades lost in that brutal war, and the sacrifices made to eke out a narrow victory. All of it just might be rendered moot if these Hyrogen bastards had their way today. Roy knew immediately this brazen attack on a civilian ship in neutral territory was a violation of the peace treaty and a deliberate act of war. With a resigned sigh, he moved to the bridge, realizing that his presence at the 50th anniversary ceremony on Arcadia was about to be very delayed, assuming any of them survived. But then he saw it, the glimmer of an utterly insane idea, staring out the transparasteel windows. There, silent and unmoving against the swirling colors of the nebula, was the rusting hulk of his old flagship, the legendary battleship Hornet, the savior of humanity, once presumed lost forever to the void. Roy turned to the Celestia's captain with a mad gleam in his eye. "Hail the Krelix! I need to have a word with those Hyrogen sons of bitches." Roy's hail was answered by the scowling face of Captain Indus. The Hyrogen sneered at the screen. "Why would I discuss terms with prey?" "I am Admiral Roy Green of the Human Defense Fleet. I'm no mere prey, Captain Indus." Indus's eyes widened in surprise for a split second before he caught himself. "Admiral Green, I congratulate you on your glorious victory in the Arcadia system 50 years ago." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "My father commanded a destroyer in that battle, a destroyer destroyed by your forces." Roy bowed his head. "You have my condolences for your loss, but the Arcadia system is neutral territory under the Centauri Accords. Any act of violence here will be seen as an act of war by your government." Indus scoffed. "The Celestia is a civilian ship illegally carrying a military passenger. That voids its neutral status." His face contorted in anger. "Did you really think you could hide from us? Hyrogen intelligence has been tracking your movements for months. We knew your arrogance would never allow you to refuse an invitation to celebrate your hollow victory. This was all a trap to capture you." As if to punctuate his point, the Krelix fired a warning shot past the Celestia. The luxury ship shuddered from the near miss. But then a shimmer of light caught Roy's eye. A massive Hyrogen battlecruiser decloaked behind the Krelix, its weapons charged and ready. "I present the HRS Ravager," Indus said with a vicious grin, "captained by none other than my dear older brother Manus, the head of a faction determined to restart our war with you humans." Manus's face appeared on the view screen, splitting it with Indus. His eyes burned with hatred as he glared at Roy. Roy held up his hands. 52 human warships are mere light minutes away. They may be decommissioned, but it would still be unwise to start a battle in their shadow. The brothers burst out laughing. Manus spoke, his voice a low growl. "We will destroy your pathetic relic fleet after the Ravager atomizes you and the Celestia. Today we will show humanity the futility of resisting the Hyrogen's rightful dominion of the stars." Roy abruptly ended the transmission and sprinted out of the Celestia's bridge, his old bones protesting at the sudden exertion. He ignored the startled looks of passengers and crew as he barreled through the corridors, making a beeline for the storage bay. The doors to the cavernous space whooshed open, and Roy burst inside, his eyes frantically scanning the crates of memorabilia and equipment from his old flagship. Where was it? Where was it? There. He lunged for a battered footlocker bearing the emblem of the Human Confederation Navy. He input the access code with shaking fingers and wrenched the lid open, scrabbling through the contents until his hand closed around a cylindrical object. Roy withdrew the command authorization cylinder, heart hammering as he examined it. The safety cap was still in place, the biometric scanner dark. He muttered a prayer to the gods of war as he input a code he'd never thought he'd use again. The scanner glowed green and Roy held his breath as he broadcast the emergency activation signal to the Relic fleet. Nothing happened. The ships hung in space, silent and still. Roy's heart sank. On the view screen, Manus laughed, a cruel, grating sound. How fitting that the great Admiral Green will die clinging to the relics of his former glory. The Ravager's weapons glowed as they finished charging, the barrels aimed squarely at the Celestia. But then a frantic shout came from the sensor station. Massive energy surge from the nebula! Roy watched in disbelief as, one by one, the Relic fleet came to life. Running lights flickered on, illuminating the once dark hulls. Point defense turrets swiveled to acquire targets, barrels gleaming in the starlight. Engine flares burned away the accumulation of space dust, leaving glowing ion trails in their wake. On the bridge of the Ravager, Manus surged to his feet, mandibles quivering with rage as he stared at the tactical display. The truth hit him like a plasma bolt. The Relic fleet was armed and ready for battle. A klaxon blared on the bridge as the Hornet, pride of the fleet, brought its spinal mass driver to bear on the Ravager. The battleship's escorts, cruisers and destroyers that had once been derelict husks moved to engage the Krelliks with the smooth precision of a battle drill. Manus hesitated, the realization that he'd been outplayed dawning on his face. Roy, seeing his chance, opened a broadcast channel to the Hyrogen ships. Roy's face appeared on the view screens of the Ravager and Krelliks, his expression carved from granite. "I'm sure you both believed the Relic fleet was nothing more than a floating museum," he said, his voice hard. "But did you really think we'd leave ourselves so vulnerable? The Hornet and her escorts have been on standby for the last 5 decades, maintained and upgraded with the latest weapons and system tech, a precaution against exactly this kind of Hyrogen treachery." Roy's eyes bored into Manus. "I had hoped the Centauri Accords would mark a new era of peace between our peoples, but I can't say I'm surprised by your dishonorable actions today. After all, your family has quite the history of betrayal and barbarism, even by Hyrogen standards." Manus shot to his feet with a roar that shook the Ravager's bridge. "You dare insult my lineage? My grandfather was the first Hyrogen to encounter your kind, and how did your precious Confederation reward him for seeking diplomacy with the hairless apes? His own warriors executed him for weakness." Manus slammed a fist on the armrest of his command chair. "I will succeed where he failed. The Hyrogen will put humanity in its rightful place, crushed beneath our heel. And I think I'll start with you, Admiral." He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire!" But instead of the hum of plasma cannons and the thunder of railgun batteries, there was only an ominous clicking as the Ravager's weapons failed to respond. Alarm klaxons blared. On the Krelliks, Indus was in a similar state of confusion and fury. "Engineering report," he barked into the comms. "Why are our weapons offline?" Roy allowed himself a thin smile as he held up the command authorization cylinder. "A little gift from me to you. A computer virus transmitted on a carrier wave from this cylinder. It's temporarily disabled your ship's primary systems." His smile faded. "Your new computer language is impressive. I couldn't have created this virus without help from a human agent inside your military." Indus and Manus went still at that, a new wariness in their eyes. Roy continued, "I don't know who they are, but their bravery may have just saved billions of human lives." He leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "It's over. Stand down and surrender peacefully and I'll spare your lives. Resist, and the Relic fleet will tear your ships apart." For a moment Manus was silent. Then he chuckled, a low, sinister sound that built into a full-bellied laugh. "You think you've outplayed us, Admiral? The Ravager is just the vanguard." He grinned, baring razor-sharp teeth. "A new Hyrogen war fleet is hiding in subspace, ready to storm into the Arcadia system. Today is the day we restart our war and finish it. The blood drained from Roy's face as the full scope of the Hyrogen plan became clear. Arcadia was a hub for the human confederation, home to shipyards, factories, and billions of civilians. If the Hyrogen attacked now, with the bulk of the human fleets deployed elsewhere... Roy's mind raced as he stared at the view screen, Manus's mocking laughter still ringing in his ears. The Hyrogen war fleet would arrive at any moment, and the Arcadia system would burn. He had to act now. Helm set course for the coordinates Manus gave. Maximum warp. Roy gripped the armrests of the command chair as the crew rushed to carry out his orders. The comms officer looked up, her face pale. "But sir, we'll be vastly outnumbered. It's suicide." "We don't have a choice," Roy said grimly. "We can't let that fleet reach the human worlds. The Relic fleet is all that stands between them and billions of innocent lives." He turned to the tactical station. "Broadcast the emergency reactivation codes to all ships. Bring every weapon and shield online." The Hornet shuddered as her warp engines engaged, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate. The stars on the view screen streaked into lines as the ship accelerated to faster-than-light speeds, the Relic fleet falling into formation around her. They dropped out of warp, mere kilometers from the Hyrogen staging point, the twisted space of the subspace rift looming before them. Roy's breath caught in his throat at the sight that greeted them. Hundreds of Hyrogen ships hung in space, a bristling armada of cruel, angular warships. Battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, carriers, an overwhelming force that dwarfed the Relic fleet. The Hornet's sensors registered power spikes as the Hyrogen ships prepared to enter real space. "Gods help us," someone whispered. Roy straightened in his chair, his voice steady. "Initiate Spectre protocol. All ships assume Epsilon formation." As one, the Relic fleet wheeled and dove, weaving around each other in a complex, synchronized dance. The ship's warcores linked together, sharing sensor data and thruster control. To the watching Hyrogen, it would appear as if the human fleet had suddenly multiplied in size, a vast armada emerging from the rift. "Broadcast false transponder signals and dummy sensor readings on all frequencies," Roy ordered. "Make it look like the entire Third Fleet just arrived." The comms officer nodded, her fingers flying over her console. The Relic fleet's EW suite pulsed outwards, flooding local space with ghost images of human Confederation ships. For a moment, the Hyrogen fleet hung motionless, confusion evident in their formation as they tried to make sense of the sudden appearance of a massive human force. Roy held his breath, praying his desperate bluff would work. The sensors pinged as the lead Hyrogen dreadnought hailed them. Roy nodded at the comms officer, and the face of a grizzled Hyrogen commander appeared on the view screen. "This is Supreme Commander Carex of the Hyrogen Combined Fleet," the alien growled, his yellow eyes narrowed. "You are trespassing in Hyrogen space. Withdraw immediately, or be destroyed." Roy forced himself to smile. Commander Carex, I apologize for the surprise, but I thought it prudent to greet you personally, given the circumstances." He gestured at the sensor display, which showed the ghostly outlines of dozens of human battleships. "As you can see, I've brought a few friends. I believe you've already met the Third Fleet?" Carex glanced down at his own display, mandibles twitching. "Impossible," he hissed. "Our intel reported the Third Fleet was in the Gamma Quadrant." "Well, I'm afraid your intel was mistaken," Roy said, putting every ounce of confidence he could muster into his voice. "The Third Fleet arrived mere hours ago, and as we speak, the Fifth and Seventh Fleets are en route to this position." He leaned forward, his tone hardening. "So I'll make this very simple, Commander. You have two choices. Either withdraw your ships immediately, or be annihilated. The human Confederation will not tolerate any incursion into our space. I trust I've made myself clear." Carex hesitated, his clawed hands clenching on his command chair. He glanced again at the sensor readings, unease flickering in his eyes. Finally, he looked back at Roy, hatred burning in his gaze. "This isn't over, human," he snarled. "The Hyrogen will have their rightful place in the galaxy, and when we do, I will personally mount your head in my trophy room." The view screen went dark as Karex cut the transmission. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the Hirogen fleet began to turn away from the rift, their ship's drives flaring as they prepared to depart. In the Hornet's CIC, the crew erupted into cheers. Roy sagged back in his chair, hardly daring to believe it had worked. They had done it. They had bluffed the Hirogen into retreating without firing a single shot. But his elation was short-lived. The sensor officer suddenly shouted in alarm, pointing at her display, "Sir, the Celestia! She's under attack!" Roy whipped around to stare at the readout. A single warp signature, moving at impossible speed directly for the Starliner's location. Dread coiled in his gut as he realized what it meant. "Manus," he breathed. "He's making a run for the Celestia." The comms crackled with a panicked transmission from the liner's captain. "Mayday, Mayday, we are under attack. A Hirogen shuttle just decloaked off our stern and is on a collision course. Our shields can't take much more." Roy was already moving, barking orders as he ran for the turbo lift. "Navigation. Lay in an intercept course. Divert all power to engines." The lift doors hissed shut behind him as he hurtled towards the bridge. There was no time to recall the Relic fleet. He would have to stop Manus himself. He burst onto the bridge, startling the skeleton crew. "Prepare for emergency warp jump," he shouted, throwing himself into the command chair. "Tractor beams, lock onto that shuttle the moment we drop out of warp." The helmsman shook his head. "Sir, a jump that close will tear the ship apart. The inertial dampeners can't—" "Do it," Roy roared. "That's an order." The crew scrambled to obey as Roy input the coordinates himself, his hands shaking. He knew this was a one-way trip. The Hornet was never meant to make a warp jump in such a state. Her hull would buckle, her warp core would breach. But he had to try. "All hands, brace for impact." The Hornet vanished in a blaze of Cherenkov radiation, the tortured scream of her engines echoing through the hull as the ship strained against the forces tearing at her. Manus's shuttle loomed before them, growing larger by the millisecond as they hurtled out of warp speed. Roy could see the Celestia directly ahead, her hull pitted and scarred from the shuttle's attack. There was no time. No time to raise shields, no time to fire weapons. Only one chance to stop Manus from murdering the innocent families on board the liner. Roy closed his eyes as the shuttle filled the view screen, bracing for the impact. The collision was utterly silent. There was a flash of light, a moment of searing heat, and then nothing. Roy's world vanished in an instant as Manus's shuttle slammed into the Hornet's bridge at a significant fraction of light speed, the impact utterly destroying both ships in a blaze of plasma and debris. Manus died instantly, his body vaporized before he could even comprehend what had happened. The Hornet, mortally wounded, listed out of control, her structure crumpling like tin foil as she tumbled towards the yawning storm of a nearby gas giant. On board the stricken ship, the Relic fleet AIs stirred, their final orders blinking in their command cores. With the Hornet's destruction imminent, they initiated their self-destruct protocols, fusion bombs detonating in the heart of each ship. One by one, the Relic fleet died, consumed by nuclear fire, their advanced technology forever denied to the enemy. The Hornet vanished into the roiling clouds of the gas giant, Roy's body entombed within her broken hull, as the ship plunged into the planet's crushing depths. In his final moments, he had done his duty, just as he had sworn to do all those years ago. He had given his life to save others, and in doing so had helped avert a war that would have consumed billions. In the aftermath, a fragile peace returned to the galaxy, the Hirogen too battered and war-weary, to continue their aggression. The Human Confederation mourned Roy as a hero, his sacrifice forever remembered in the annals of history. But for those who knew him best, his friends, his family, his comrades in arms, Roy's death left a void that could never be filled. They grieved for the man he had been, the indomitable spirit and kind heart that had touched so many lives. And in the quiet moments between the parades and speeches and memorials, they wondered if the cycle of war and vengeance would ever truly end, or if Roy's sacrifice would be just one more loss in an endless, futile struggle. The scars left by the Hirogen conflict would linger for generations, a reminder of how close the galaxy had come to the brink of destruction. And though Roy was gone, his legacy endured, a shining example of courage and selflessness in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.